On the morning of August 18th, 1590, an English ship eased through the dangerous shoals off the coast of what would one day become North Carolina, and a tired, gray-haired governor named John White climbed down into a landing boat. The date carried a painful weight, for it was, to the very day, the third birthday of his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child ever born in the New World. White had been gone for 3 unbearable years, held hostage by a war that consumed the Atlantic. And now he was finally coming home to the 115 colonists he had left behind. Among them, his own daughter and the granddaughter he had only ever held as a newborn. As his boat scraped onto the beach of Roanoke Island, he listened for the familiar music of a living settlement. Voices, hammers, barking dogs, children at play. What greeted him instead was a silence so complete it felt like a held breath. The colony was empty. The palisade walls still stood. The houses had been carefully taken down rather than burned. And there were no bodies, no graves, and no signs of panic or violence anywhere. Only one message waited for him in that eerie stillness. A single word carved in capital letters into a wooden post at the entrance of the fort. Croatoan. Here is a detail most retellings leave out. Before sailing for England, White and the settlers had agreed on a secret code. If the colonists were ever forced to abandon Roanoke under attack or in distress, they were to carve a Maltese cross above their message. White searched the post and the surrounding trees desperately and found no cross. Wherever his people had gone, they had apparently gone willingly, and yet fate never allowed him an answer. A brutal storm blew up the very next day, snapping anchor cables and nearly wrecking his ship, and his captains refused to sail the short distance south to Croatoan to look for survivors. John White was dragged back across the ocean and died years later on an estate in Ireland, never learning what had become of his family. To understand how it came to this, you have to rewind the story. The Roanoke venture was the pet project of Sir Walter Raleigh, the ambitious favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, who held a royal charter to plant England's flag in the Americas, though Raleigh himself never once set foot on the continent he tried to colonize. And the 1587 settlers were not even the first attempt. 2 years earlier, in 1585, a garrison of soldiers under Ralph Lane had occupied the same island, alienated the local tribes, and fled home with Sir Francis Drake when supplies collapsed. A relief ship arriving weeks later found the place empty and left behind 15 men to hold the fort. Those 15 were never seen again, a grim dress rehearsal for the larger vanishing to come. Even the location of the 1587 colony was an accident. The settlers were actually supposed to plant their new city on the Chesapeake Bay, but their pilot, a hot-tempered Portuguese navigator named Simon Fernandez, refused to carry them any farther and effectively dumped them at Roanoke. Within days, tragedy struck when a colonist named George Howe, wading alone in the shallows to catch crabs, was killed by native warriors still nursing grievances from Lane's brutal occupation. It was this spiral of bad luck that convinced the colonists to send White back to England for help, and it was England's desperate naval war against the Spanish Armada in 1588 that trapped him there, as every seaworthy vessel was seized for the fight. When White finally scraped together 2 small ships that year, French pirates attacked and looted them at sea, wounding him and forcing him home again empty-handed. For over 400 years since, the fate of those 115 men, women, and children has stood as America's oldest and coldest missing persons case, and in the vacuum of hard evidence, imagination ran wild. Some insisted the colonists were slaughtered by hostile tribes. Others pointed to Spanish patrols hunting down rival outposts along the coast. Folklore conjured famine, madness, and even supernatural curses. The confusion reached its peak in the 1930s with the notorious Dare stones, a collection of nearly 50 inscribed rocks that surfaced across the American South, supposedly carved by Eleanor Dare herself to chronicle the colony's doom. The stones became a national sensation, were studied at Emory University, and were then exposed as an elaborate hoax, although a handful of scholars still argue to this day that the very first stone might be genuine. But history rarely deals in ghost stories. Far more often, it deals in ordinary people making desperate choices to stay alive. And thanks to a remarkable combination of archival sleuthing, modern excavation, and discoveries announced during the 2024 to 2025 research seasons, the fog that has clung to Roanoke for 4 centuries is at last burning away. What is rising out of the Carolina soil is not a tale of vanishing, but a story of survival through radical adaptation. The turning point in the modern investigation came not from a trench, but from an archive. In 2012, researchers at the British Museum re-examined a fragile watercolor map of the Carolina coast painted by John White himself, known as La Virginia Pars. Scholars had pored over it for generations, but when specialists placed it on a light box, a method used to expose hidden sketches and corrections, something extraordinary appeared. Concealed beneath a small paper patch glued onto the map was the ghostly outline of a four-pointed star fort. Its position was the real shock, roughly 50 miles inland from Roanoke, near where the Roanoke and Chowan rivers meet. Suddenly, a throwaway line in White's own writings snapped into focus, for he had noted that the colonists intended to relocate 50 miles into the Main. The patch, researchers suspect, was deliberate camouflage, a way of hiding the colony's escape destination from Spanish agents who intercepted English documents. The map, in other words, was not merely art. It was an encrypted survival plan. That revelation sent archaeologists racing to the mainland. Led by the First Colony Foundation, excavation teams abandoned the sands of Roanoke and began digging at a quiet spot in Bertie County that they codenamed Site X. The logic of the search was simple and almost poetic. After 4 centuries, you do not hunt for wooden walls because wood rots away to nothing. You hunt for garbage. And the garbage delivered. Near the remains of an abandoned Native American village, diggers recovered shards of English domestic pottery, a distinctive green-glazed ceramic called Surrey Hampshire borderware. Yet the most powerful clue was an absence rather than a presence. Not a single clay tobacco pipe turned up. That silence speaks volumes, because the Jamestown colonists who arrived in 1607 smoked obsessively, and their trash pits overflow with broken pipes. A 16th century English site with no pipes at all is a chronological signature, proof that the people who dropped these objects lived there before Jamestown existed. They could only have been Elizabethans. Skeptics initially dismissed Site X as a fluke, perhaps a brief hunting camp or the leavings of an earlier scouting party. Then the doubters lost their strongest argument. The First Colony Foundation confirmed a second, entirely separate Elizabethan site in the same Bertie County area, designated Site Y, demonstrating that the English presence inland was not a single anomaly, but a sustained migration. To lay the evidence before the public, the Foundation teamed up with UNC Press to publish a detailed volume, Excavating the Lost Colony Mystery, packed with photographs of never-before-seen artifacts and the freshest dig data. The inland theory has graduated from speculation to documented history. Yet the trail into the forest is only half of the answer. While one team worked the riverbanks of Bertie County, another was sifting the wind-scoured dunes of Hatteras Island to the southeast. Because in 1590, that word carved on the post, Croatoan, was never really a riddle. It was an address. Croatoan was simply the Elizabethan name for Hatteras Island, home of the one tribe that had remained loyal to the English, the people of the colonists' trusted interpreter and friend, Manteo, a native leader who had twice sailed to London and back. For centuries, the oral traditions of the Lumbee and other Croatan descendants insisted that the colonists never disappeared at all, that they simply married into the tribe and became part of it. Academia waved these stories away as legend, but the legends had witnesses. As early as 1701, the English explorer John Lawson visited Hatteras and recorded something astonishing. Members of the tribe with gray eyes who proudly told him their ancestors were white people who could talk in a book, who could read. The shovels have now caught up with the stories. Excavations on Hatteras, including work reported from the 2024 to 2025 seasons, have exposed a site where English and Native American refuse lies mingled in the very same pits, the archaeological equivalent of a smoking gun for cohabitation. Indigenous pottery sits alongside 16th century English gear, the corroded hilt of a rapier, worked European copper, and in earlier digs, even more intimate objects, a slate writing tablet still paired with its lead pencil, and a signet ring that ignited worldwide headlines. Nothing about the site suggests battle or conquest. It looks like a neighborhood. It looks like two peoples, cooking, eating, and raising children in the same place. Put all the pieces together and a coherent picture finally emerges. The colony did not vanish. It divided. Facing empty food stores, spreading sickness, and the slowly dawning horror that no rescue ship was coming, the settlers made a coldly rational decision and split their numbers. One group pushed inland toward the river country of Site X and Site Y. Another turned south to shelter with Manteo's people on Croatoan. To confirm this final chapter, science has opened the last remaining archive, human blood. The Lost Colony DNA Project, directed by genetic genealogist Roberta Estes, has spent years comparing Y chromosome, mitochondrial, and autosomal DNA from modern volunteers against 16th century English lineages. Dozens of families now show genetic threads reaching back toward Elizabethan England. The most haunting case belongs to a participant known publicly only as Mr. Brown, whose Y-DNA matches a Tudor-era English line, and whose surname matches two colonists, Henry and William Brown, listed on the original 1587 passenger roll. Across 400 years of silence, a bloodline answered. In the end, Roanoke is far bigger than a campfire mystery. It quietly dismantles the story America likes to tell about its own beginning. We are raised on images of Europeans arriving, conquering, and building walls against the wilderness. Roanoke inverts all of it. It is the story of imperial confidence collapsing in the face of hunger and abandonment, of colonizers who survived only by ceasing to be colonizers. When the supply ships never came, the settlers of Roanoke took down their houses, plank by plank, walked away from everything England had told them they were, and entrusted their futures to the very people their empire had come to displace. Their bloodlines flowed into the rivers and islands of the land itself. The 115 souls of Roanoke were never lost at all. For 4 centuries we searched for a dead English colony when the truth was standing in front of us the whole time. A living American family. Thanks for watching. If stories like this, the forgotten corners and hidden chapters of human history, are your kind of thing, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And tell me in the comments, do you believe the assimilation theory, or do you think Roanoke still has one more secret to give up? See you in the next one.